Before we begin, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about a cure. This is a story about desperation, about the terrible certainty of death arriving on the fangs of a dog, the claws of a fox, the bite of something wild that crossed the fragile boundary between nature and civilization. This is about what people will believe when the alternative is watching someone they love descend into madness, their throat closing against water, their body convulsing, their mind unraveling until there is nothing left but an animal howl and then silence. For more than 4,000 years, rabies destroyed lives with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Once symptoms appeared, death was not just likely. It was absolute, 100% fatal. And in that vacuum of hope, in that space where medicine had no answers, there arose a belief in something called a mad stone. A small, porous object, sometimes no bigger than a thumbnail, sometimes as large as an egg, that people believed could draw the poison from a rabid bite the way a magnet draws iron. Thousands of people traveled hundreds of miles to press these stones against their wounds. Families sold everything they owned for a chance at this cure. Abraham Lincoln himself made the journey with his son. And here is what makes this story truly haunting. The mad stones never worked. They couldn't work. And yet the belief in them persisted for centuries, became woven into the fabric of frontier medicine, became legend. This is a story about faith and fear, about the human need to believe we have power over death even when we don't. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, phone away, distractions silenced. We're going back to a time when a dog's bite could be a death sentence, and the only thing standing between you and madness was a stone pulled from an animal's stomach. Let's begin. In the beginning, there was fear. Before there were cities, before there was writing, before humanity built the first monuments to its own ambition, there was the bite. Archaeological evidence suggests that rabies has stalked our species since we first shared the earth with wolves. The virus is ancient beyond measure, encoded in the DNA of mammals for millions of years, waiting in the saliva of infected animals like a patient assassin. The first chapter of this story takes us to the cradle of civilization itself, to Mesopotamia in 2300 BCE, where scribes working in the shadowed halls of Babylon carved the earliest known reference to rabies into clay. The Asmuna Code, one of humanity's first legal documents, contains provisions for what must happen when a dog goes mad. If a dog bit someone and that person died in agony days or weeks later, the owner of the dog had to pay a fine. 40 shekels of silver if the victim was a freedman. 15 shekels if they were a slave. The Babylonians understood even then that something terrible passed from beast to man through the wound. In ancient Egypt, papyri from 1500 BCE describe dogs that behave strangely, that foam at the mouth, that attack without provocation. The Egyptians called it a curse of the gods, a punishment sent by Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and war. They had treatments, of course. They ground up specific herbs, mixed them with honey and animal fat, pressed the mixture into the wound. None of it worked. The victims still died, their bodies rigid, their throats unable to swallow, their eyes wide with a terror that no one who watched would ever forget. Move forward to classical Greece, to the philosopher Democritus writing in 500 BCE. He described canine rabies as a burning of the nerves, a disease that traveled from the wound up through the body until it reached the brain and set it aflame. Aristotle, a century later, noted that dogs suffer from the madness, and that this madness could be transmitted to humans. He wrote about the progression, how the animal first became withdrawn, then agitated, then violent. How it would attack anything that moved, including its own masters. How it would die always within 10 days of showing symptoms. The Greeks had a name for the human version of this disease. They called it Lyssa, after the minor goddess who personified mad rage. In their mythology, Lyssa was the daughter of Nyx, the night itself, and she rode with the Furies, driving people to madness and violence. When a person contracted rabies, they said Lyssa had visited them. The cure, such as it was, involved sacrificing to the gods and hoping for mercy. Mercy rarely came. In the 1st century CE, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, the great Roman medical writer, made a crucial observation. He noted that rabies was transmitted through the saliva of the biting animal. He understood, in a way few before him had, that this was not a curse or a divine punishment, but something physical, something that moved from one creature to another through the wound. His treatment recommendations, however, remained brutal. He advocated for immediate cauterization. Heat an iron rod until it glowed white in the forge, then press it directly into the wound, burning deep enough to destroy all the tissue that the animal's teeth had touched. The pain was extraordinary. Many victims would pass out from the shock, but Celsus argued it was better to suffer that pain than to die of hydrophobia. Hydrophobia, the fear of water. This became the defining symptom, the one that everyone recognized. As the rabies virus made its way up the nervous system toward the brain, as it began to cause inflammation in the throat and the muscles used for swallowing, victims found they could no longer drink. The mere sight of water would cause their throat to spasm. The sound of pouring liquid could trigger convulsions. They would die of thirst with water right in front of them, their bodies refusing the very thing they needed to survive. Roman physicians watched this happen over and over, recorded it in their texts, and had absolutely no way to stop it. By the Middle Ages, rabies had become woven into the fabric of European life. It appeared in folk tales as a curse, in religious texts as a test of faith. The disease spread through the populations of feral dogs that roamed the streets of medieval cities, surviving on garbage and rats. Dog bites were common. Rabies deaths were regular enough that they barely warranted mention in local records. A mad dog was killed. Its recent victims were noted. And then everyone waited to see who would die. It was during this period that the first bezoars entered European medical practice. Traders returning from Persia brought with them stones pulled from the stomachs of goats and gazelles, stones that Arabic physicians claimed could neutralize any poison. The word bezoar comes from the Persian panzir, meaning antidote. These stones formed naturally when an animal swallowed something indigestible, a stone or a ball of plant matter. And over months or years, the object became coated in layers of hair and minerals and phosphates, building up like layers of nacre in an oyster, until it became a smooth, heavy ball. Persian and Arabic medical texts from the 8th through 12th centuries contain extensive documentation of bezoar stones. The great physician Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote extensively about rabies in his canon of medicine. He correctly identified that the disease was transmitted through saliva. He noted the long incubation period, how someone could be bitten and show no symptoms for weeks or even months. He documented the progression, the initial wound healing normally, then the subtle changes, the unease, the fever, the growing terror, and finally the hydrophobia and the madness. His recommended treatment included both cauterization and the application of bezoar stones. He believed the stone could draw out what he called the rabid poison before it reached the brain. The use of bezoar stones spread throughout the Islamic world and into Christian Europe through trade routes and the Crusades. By the 13th century, they were prized possessions in royal courts. Kings and nobles collected them, mounted them in gold and silver, kept them in locked boxes. The belief was that a bezoar could detect and neutralize any poison. If you dropped a bezoar into a cup of poisoned wine, people said, the liquid would bubble and foam. If you scraped a bit of the bezoar into powder and added it to food, it would render any toxin harmless. This was the age of poison in European courts. Rivals were eliminated with arsenic in wine, with hemlock in bread, with mysterious powders that brought death in agonizing cramps and convulsions. A bezoar was insurance. A bezoar was power. And if it could neutralize arsenic, people reasoned, why not the poison of rabies? But rabies was different. Rabies was not a toxin that could be absorbed or neutralized. It was a virus, though no one in medieval Europe had any concept of what a virus was. It was a living thing, microscopic, invisible, that hijacked the cells of the nervous system and forced them to create more copies of itself. It traveled up the neurons like a climber ascending a rope, moving inexorably from the wound site toward the brain, and once it arrived, it began to destroy the tissue that made thought and personality and consciousness possible. In 1403, in the village of Liege in what is now Belgium, a man named Hubert died and was declared a saint. Legend said he had been a nobleman who loved hunting above all things, and that one Good Friday he had gone hunting instead of attending church. In the forest, he encountered a magnificent stag with a glowing crucifix between its antlers. The stag spoke to him, warned him to change his ways or face damnation. Hubert devoted the rest of his life to God and became a bishop. After his death, miracles were attributed to him, particularly miracles involving protection from rabid animals. The Abbey of St. Hubert became a pilgrimage site for anyone bitten by a potentially rabid animal. Monks at the abbey developed what they called St. Hubert's key, an iron tool shaped like a nail or a cross. The key would be heated in the abbey's forge until it glowed red, then pressed into the flesh around the bite wound, cauterizing it in the name of the saint. Pilgrims who couldn't travel to the abbey could purchase smaller versions of the key to hang in their homes. The belief was that St. Hubert watched over anyone who kept his key, that he would turn aside the madness if it came. The treatment was agony, the smell of burning flesh, the smoke rising from the wound. Many victims would vomit from the pain or lose consciousness, but the alternative was worse, far worse. And so they endured it, and they prayed, and they waited to see if the madness would come. But then, something changed. As European colonization spread across the globe in the 16th and 17th centuries, as ships carried goods and animals and diseases to every corner of the world, the understanding of bezoar stones became more complex. Spanish conquistadors returning from the Americas brought with them new varieties of bezoars, stones pulled from llamas and vicuñas in the high Andes. Portuguese traders brought stones from Indian antelopes and Persian wild goats. Each variety was said to have slightly different properties, slightly different powers. The Medici family of Florence, masters of both commerce and poison, became obsessed with bezoar stones. Ferdinand I de' Medici reportedly tested various bezoars by poisoning condemned prisoners and then attempting to save them with the stones. The results, such as they were documented, seemed mixed. Some prisoners survived, most didn't. But the Medicis continued to believe, continued to collect, continued to incorporate powdered bezoar into their medical preparations. In 1567, the French surgeon Ambroise Paré conducted a more formal experiment. King Charles IX of France owned a famous bezoar and wanted to know if it truly worked. A cook in the royal kitchen had been caught stealing silver and was sentenced to hang. Paré proposed an alternative. They would poison the cook with mercury sublimate, then attempt to save him with the king's bezoar. The cook, given the choice between hanging and the experiment, chose the experiment. Within hours of taking the poison, he was in agony. Paré administered the powdered bezoar in wine. The cook died 7 hours later in convulsions. Paré's conclusion was unambiguous. Bezoars were useless against poison. But the belief persisted. Because belief, when it comes to life and death, is not easily dislodged by evidence. The second chapter reveals how these stones made their way to the New World and transformed into something uniquely American. When European settlers arrived in North America in the 1600s, they brought their dogs with them. And the dogs brought rabies. The first recorded outbreak of canine rabies in what would become the United States occurred in Virginia in 1753. The disease spread through the colonies, carried by strays and half-wild dogs that lived on the edges of settlement. Native American tribes who had never encountered rabies before were devastated by outbreaks. They had no immunity, no cultural memory of how to respond, no protective rituals. The settlers brought with them the folk knowledge of Europe, the understanding that rabies was transmitted by bite, that it was always fatal once symptoms appeared, and that immediate treatment of the wound was essential. But they had no access to St. Hubert's Abbey. They had no supply of Persian bezoars. They had to improvise. Native American healing practices included the use of certain stones for drawing out poisons and infections. Various tribes used smooth river stones, stones with particular markings, stones that had been found in unusual circumstances. These stones would be heated or soaked in water or in medicinal preparations, then applied to wounds, held in place with leather bindings. The belief was that the stone could draw out whatever evil had entered the body through the wound. Frontiersmen and settlers began to hear stories about these healing stones, and they began to look for stones of their own. The most promising candidates, they discovered, came from the stomachs of deer. When hunters butchered deer, they occasionally found hard masses in the stomach, concretions of hair and minerals that had formed around some bit of indigestible matter. These were extremely rare. A hunter might butcher 100 deer and never find one, but when they did find one, word spread. The stone was saved. It was treasured. And when someone in the community was bitten by a potentially rabid animal, the stone was brought out. By the 18th century, these American bezoars had acquired a new name, madstones. The word captured their purpose perfectly. They were meant to prevent madness. The madness of rabies, the hydrophobia, the terrible transformation from human to something less than human, something that frothed and bit and died in agony. A madstone was a charm against that fate. The treatment protocol for madstones evolved over time, passed from one family to another, from one community to another, until a standard practice emerged. First, the wound had to be cleaned. Then the madstone would be soaked in fresh milk, preferably milk that had been drawn that same day, still warm from the cow or goat. The stone would absorb the milk like a sponge. Then it would be pressed against the wound while it was still wet. If the wound was infected with rabies, people believed the stone would stick. It would adhere to the skin through some mysterious suction, some power that drew the poison out of the flesh and into the porous structure of the stone. The victim would sit, the stone attached to their skin, and wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes for an entire day. When the stone had absorbed as much poison as it could hold, it would fall away on its own. Then came the critical step. The stone would be placed in a pot of fresh milk and boiled. As the milk heated, a green or yellow scum would rise to the surface. This, the owners of madstones claimed, was the poison being drawn out of the stone. The milk with its scum would be thrown away, the stone would be washed, and then the process would be repeated. The stone would be soaked again, applied again, would stick again. This cycle continued until finally, the stone would no longer stick to the wound. That was the sign. That was proof that all the poison had been drawn out, that the victim was cured. The most effective madstones, according to frontier lore, came from white deer or piebald deer, animals whose coloring was unusual, rare, almost supernatural. A madstone from an albino deer was worth a fortune. Families who owned such stones became known throughout their regions. People would travel for days to reach them when someone was bit. In the 1850s, one of the most famous madstones in America belonged to a family in Terre Haute, Indiana. The stone had been brought from Germany by an immigrant family and passed down through generations. By the time it reached the hands of Reverend William Newton Sutton, it had supposedly treated more than 1,000 people. Sutton never charged for the treatment. Local belief held that charging money would cause the stone to lose its power. But he accepted donations, and people gave generously, because what price could you put on your life or the life of your child? In 1852, Abraham Lincoln traveled from Springfield, Illinois, to Terre Haute with his son Robert. The boy had been bitten by a dog. Whether the dog was actually rabid, no one could say. But Lincoln was not willing to take the chance. He had seen rabies victims die. He knew what the disease did. He took his son to whoever in Terre Haute had a madstone, and the treatment was administered. Robert Lincoln lived to be 82 years old and died peacefully in his sleep. Whether the madstone had anything to do with his survival is impossible to know, but Lincoln believed it had helped. That belief was widespread among educated people, among people who should have known better. The thing about rabies is this: not everyone who is bitten by a rabid animal contracts the disease. The virus has to enter the bloodstream, has to be delivered in sufficient quantity through deep enough wounds. A person bitten by a rabid dog might have only a 15 to 30% chance of actually developing rabies. But no one knew those statistics in the 19th century. No one could test the dog to see if it was truly rabid. All they could do was wait, terrified, watching for the first signs of illness. When those signs didn't appear, when the victim remained healthy, it was easy to credit whatever treatment had been used. The madstone had worked. The saint's key had worked. The herbs had worked. And the belief was reinforced, was passed on, became part of the collective knowledge of how to survive on the frontier. Moving into the middle years of the 19th century, we find rabies becoming a significant public health concern in American cities. New York, Philadelphia, Boston all saw regular outbreaks among the populations of stray dogs that roamed their streets. Between 1840 and 1906, New York City recorded no more than 7 human cases of rabies per year, but those cases made headlines. They were spectacular in their horror. The victims would be brought to hospitals where doctors could do nothing but watch them die. Newspapers published detailed accounts. The public read them and grew more afraid. In August 1874, a letter appeared in the New York Times that captured the pure terror of the disease. A man described watching his young son die of hydrophobia after being bitten weeks earlier by a neighbor's dog. He described how the boy first complained of pain at the site of the healed wound, how the pain spread up his arm, how the fever came, and with it a growing sense of dread, how the boy began to fear water, how he would scream if anyone tried to give him a drink, how the convulsions started, the body arching backward, the muscles rigid, how the boy would have moments of lucidity where he knew what was happening to him, knew he was dying, and would beg his father to help him, and how, finally, after days of suffering, the boy died, his last sounds not words but animalistic howls. The letter asked a simple question. In an age of steam engines and telegraph lines, in an age when humanity was mastering the natural world, why was there no cure for this? Why did medicine have nothing to offer except morphine to dull the agony and restraints to keep the victim from hurting themselves? The answer was that no one understood what rabies actually was. Doctors knew it was transmitted through saliva. They knew the incubation period could be as short as a few days or as long as several months. They knew the progression of symptoms. But they didn't know about viruses. Wouldn't know about viruses until the 1890s. They thought rabies was some kind of poison, some miasma that traveled through the body. And if it was a poison, then perhaps it could be neutralized, drawn out, removed. Mad stones in this context made a certain kind of sense. They fit the prevailing medical theory. They provided a mechanism, an explanation, an action to take. And in the absence of anything better, people clung to them. In Texas, a mad stone belonging to the Milam family of Collin County became legendary. The Milam mad stone was in use from the 1850s until 1897, a span of 47 years. The family kept detailed records. They claimed to have treated over 400 people. Only twice, they said, had the stone failed. Both failures were explained by circumstances. One victim had too thick a beard for the stone to make proper contact with the wound. Another had accidentally swallowed some of the poison before treatment could begin. In both cases, the fault was not with the stone, but with the application of it. Other famous mad stones included the Lightburn stone, which was in use for over a century and was reportedly called into service at least once a week during the dog days of August. The Porter Madstone of Missouri. The Virginia Madstone, which had supposedly been brought from England in the 1600s. Each had its own provenance, its own stories of miraculous cures, its own devoted believers, and the believers included doctors. Multiple physicians attempted to buy mad stones, offering considerable sums of money. They were always refused. The stones, their owners insisted, lost their power if money changed hands. But the doctor's interest is significant. These were educated men who had studied medicine, who understood anatomy and physiology as it was understood in the 19th century. And they believed, or at least wanted to believe, that mad stones might work. In August 1923, a farmer in Missouri named Adam Rarely was bitten by a rabid dog while defending his pigs. He immediately got on his horse and rode 25 miles to the town of Buffalo to see Reverend William Newton Sutton, who owned a mad stone that had been in his family since just after the Civil War. Sutton treated Rarely using the traditional method, soaking the stone in fresh milk, applying it to the wound, waiting for it to fall away, boiling it to remove the poison, repeating the process. The stone stuck for 6 hours the first time, 2 hours the second time, 45 minutes the third time. The fourth time, it wouldn't stick at all. Rarely was cured. He lived for many more years and told the story to anyone who would listen. But was he actually infected with rabies? There's no way to know. The dog was killed, but no one in 1923, Missouri had the capability to test it for the virus. Rarely never developed symptoms, but he might never have been infected in the first place. The mad stone might have done absolutely nothing. But in Rarely's mind, and in Sutton's mind, and in the minds of everyone in Buffalo, Missouri, who heard the story, the stone had saved him. This is the power of anecdotal evidence. This is how folk medicine persists across generations. One apparent success story can outweigh 100 quiet failures, because the failures disappear. The family whose child died despite the mad stone treatment doesn't publicize it. They grieve privately, they bury their dead, and they move on. But the successes become legend. They get told and retold. They become proof. What happened next would shock the world. In July 1885, in the village of Masingot in Alsace, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was attacked by a rabid dog. The animal bit him 14 times on his hands, legs, and thighs. His mother, in terror, brought him to the local doctor, who cauterized the wounds with carbolic acid, the standard treatment. But everyone knew what was coming. The boy was going to die, probably within a few weeks, certainly within a few months. It was only a matter of time. Joseph's mother had heard rumors of a scientist in Paris, a man named Louis Pasteur who was working on a possible cure for rabies. Desperate, she brought her son to Pasteur's laboratory. Pasteur was not a medical doctor. He was a chemist and microbiologist who had made his name studying fermentation and developing a process to prevent wine and milk from spoiling, a process that came to be called pasteurization. For several years, he had been working on rabies, trying to understand the disease, trying to find a way to prevent it. Pasteur's approach was revolutionary. He had already developed vaccines for chicken cholera and anthrax by taking the disease-causing agent and weakening it, then exposing animals to the weakened form to stimulate their immune systems. He theorized the same approach might work for rabies. He couldn't see the virus, didn't even know for certain that viruses existed, but he knew that something in the saliva and nervous tissue of rabid animals caused the disease. He had been taking spinal cord tissue from rabbits infected with rabies and allowing it to dry for varying lengths of time. The older the tissue, the more the rabies agent weakened. After 14 days of drying, the tissue was essentially harmless. Fresh tissue was fully virulent. His plan was to inject a patient with increasingly strong doses, starting with the weakest, 14-day-old material and working up to fresher, more potent doses. The theory was that each injection would stimulate the immune system a little more, building up resistance gradually, until by the time the rabies virus from the bite made its way to the brain, the immune system would be ready to fight it off. But it was just a theory. He had never tested it on a human. He had no idea if it would work or if it might actually make things worse. Joseph Meister's case presented a terrible ethical dilemma. The boy was almost certainly going to die without treatment, but the treatment itself was experimental, untested, potentially dangerous. Pasteur consulted with two physicians, Jacques-Joseph Grancher and Alfred Vulpian. They examined the boy, looked at the severity of his wounds, and agreed that without intervention he had no chance. They decided to proceed. On July 6, 1885, Pasteur injected Joseph Meister with his first dose of the rabies vaccine. It was made from the spinal cord of a rabbit that had died of rabies 15 days earlier. Over the next 10 days, Pasteur gave the boy 13 more injections, each one from progressively fresher tissue, each one more potent than the last. The final injection was from tissue only 1 day old, highly virulent, capable of causing rabies on its own under normal circumstances. And then they waited. Days passed. A week, 2 weeks, a month. The incubation period for rabies could be anywhere from a few days to several months, but with bites as severe as Joseph had suffered, symptoms usually appeared within 3 to 8 weeks. If they appeared at all, they would appear soon. They never appeared. Joseph Meister remained healthy. He showed no signs of fever, no pain, no hydrophobia. The vaccine had worked. News of the success spread across Europe and then across the world. Pasteur was hailed as a miracle worker, a savior. People who had been bitten by rabid animals began traveling to Paris from across Europe and even from America, desperate for the treatment. Pasteur set up a center to administer the vaccine. In the first year, he treated more than 350 people. Almost all survived. Rabies, the disease that had been universally fatal for thousands of years, had finally met its match. But the vaccine's success revealed something else. It revealed that mad stones had never worked. That all the treatments that had come before, the cauterization and the stones and the prayers, had done nothing. The people who survived after using mad stones had survived because they were never infected in the first place, or because their immune systems fought off the virus on their own, or because the stars aligned in their favor for reasons that had nothing to do with the treatment. The era of the mad stone should have ended there, in 1885, with Pasteur's vaccine. But it didn't, because Pasteur's vaccine wasn't immediately available everywhere. It took years for the treatment to spread beyond Paris. It required fresh biological material. It required trained physicians to administer it. It required infrastructure that didn't exist in rural America, in the frontier regions, in the small towns where people still relied on folk medicine because it was all they had access to. And so mad stones continued to be used. People continued to believe in them. Even into the early 20th century, even after the rabies vaccine had become standard medical practice in cities, farmers and ranchers, and people living in isolated regions still sought out mad stones when they were bit. The Sutton Mad Stone in Missouri was still in use in the 1920s. Other stones remained active even longer. The interesting thing about mad stones is that no one could ever agree on what they actually were. Some were genuine bezoars, concretions from deer stomachs. But others, when examined by scientists, turned out to be fossilized coral or interesting-looking pebbles or polished seeds or minerals like halloysite or white feldspar. One, offered to the Smithsonian Institution for $1,000 in the late 19th century, was identified as nothing more than the polished seed of a Kentucky coffee tree. What mattered was not the composition of the stone, but its appearance. It had to look unusual. It had to look like it came from an animal. It had to look like it could absorb something, draw something out. Its power came from belief, from the story attached to it, from the generations of apparent success. The story continues. As we approach the modern age, we find rabies undergoing a transformation. By the early 20th century, cities in America and Europe began implementing dog control measures. Stray dogs were rounded up. Licensing requirements were instituted. Rabies vaccines for dogs began to be developed and distributed. The incidence of dog-borne rabies in humans began to drop dramatically, but wildlife rabies persisted. Foxes, raccoons, skunks, bats, all served as reservoirs for the virus. In the 1940s and 1950s, the United States saw a shift in rabies epidemiology. Dog bites as a source of human rabies became rare, but people started dying from exposure to rabid wildlife, particularly bats. Often these were cases where the person didn't even know they'd been bit. A bat flying around a bedroom at night, touching someone's arm or hand, leaving a tiny wound that went unnoticed. Weeks later, symptoms would appear, and by then it was too late. The rabies post-exposure prophylaxis protocol evolved over the decades. Pasteur's original vaccine, made from rabbit spinal cord tissue, was used well into the 20th century, but it had significant problems. The treatment required 14 to 21 injections, administered into the abdominal wall, and they were extremely painful. Worse, the vaccine itself could sometimes cause severe neurological side effects because it contained brain tissue that could trigger an immune response against the patient's own nervous system. In the 1950s and 1960s, researchers developed new vaccines using duck embryo cells, then later using human diploid cell cultures. These vaccines were safer, more effective, required fewer doses. By the 1980s, the standard post-exposure prophylaxis protocol had been reduced to 5 or 6 injections over a period of a month, administered into the muscle of the arm like a standard vaccine. Combined with immediate administration of rabies immune globulin directly into and around the wound site, the treatment became nearly 100% effective if given before symptoms appeared. The key phrase being, before symptoms appeared. Once symptoms began, once the virus reached the brain, the disease remained almost universally fatal. Only a handful of people in recorded history have survived symptomatic rabies. The most famous case is that of Gina Geese, a teenager from Wisconsin who was bitten by a bat in 2004. By the time she sought medical attention, she was already showing symptoms. Doctors put her into a medically induced coma and attempted an experimental treatment called the Milwaukee Protocol, using a combination of antiviral drugs and immune modulators. Against all odds, she survived, though with significant neurological sequelae. Attempts to replicate this success with other patients have mostly failed. Rabies, once symptoms appear, remains death. But the fact that the disease could be prevented with post-exposure prophylaxis, that a person bitten by a rabid animal could walk into a hospital and walk out a few hours later with the first dose of vaccine and the certainty that they would not die, this represented one of medicine's greatest triumphs. It was the culmination of centuries of research, of Louis Pasteur's intuitive genius, of generations of scientists who built upon his work. And yet, in the modern era, in the 21st century, rabies continues to kill approximately 59,000 people worldwide every year. The vast majority of these deaths occur in Asia and Africa. in regions where access to post-exposure prophylaxis is limited or non-existent, where dog vaccination programs are underfunded or non-existent, where people still rely on traditional healers and folk remedies because they have no other options. In India, in rural villages far from medical centers, there are still stories of people using traditional stones and rituals to treat bites from potentially rabid dogs. The stones are different from American mad stones, but the concept is the same. The belief is the same. The desperation is the same. And the outcome all too often is the same. The person develops symptoms weeks later. The hydrophobia comes. The convulsions come. The virus reaches the brain and destroys it. And they die despite the existence of a vaccine that is nearly 100% effective because they couldn't access it in time. Today, we still grapple with the legacy of rabies and the folk remedies that arose to combat it. Mad stones sit in museums now, in historical societies, in private collections passed down through families. They are curiosities, artifacts of a time when medicine had so little to offer that people turned to magic, to belief, to stones pulled from animal stomachs in the desperate hope that they might provide protection against a death that everyone knew was coming. There is something deeply human about the mad stone phenomenon. It speaks to our need to act, to do something, anything, when faced with circumstances beyond our control. It speaks to the power of ritual, the comfort of procedure. The cleaning of the wound, the soaking of the stone in milk, the application, the waiting, the boiling away of the poison, the repetition until the cure was complete. These steps gave structure to fear. They gave a narrative to horror. They transformed a passive waiting for death into an active fight against it. And perhaps, in the darkest days of the pre-vaccine era, that narrative served a purpose. Perhaps believing you had been cured by a mad stone, even if the cure was illusory, even if you simply weren't infected in the first place, was better than spending weeks in terror waiting for symptoms that might never come. Perhaps the psychological comfort of having done something, of having sought treatment, had its own kind of healing power. But there is a darker side to this story as well. The mad stone belief persisted far beyond the point when better treatments existed. It kept people from seeking actual medical care. In the early 20th century, there were documented cases of people who used mad stones and refused to go to doctors for Pasteur's vaccine, trusting in the folk remedy instead. Some of those people died of rabies when they almost certainly could have been saved by the vaccine. The belief killed them. Their faith in the mad stone, their commitment to the tradition, became their death sentence. This pattern repeats throughout the history of medicine. Folk remedies persist long after they've been proven ineffective, long after superior treatments exist, because belief is not easily dislodged by evidence. People will cite anecdotal success stories, will point to cases where someone used a traditional treatment and survived, will argue that modern medicine doesn't understand everything, that there is ancient wisdom being lost. And sometimes they're right. Not all traditional remedies are useless. Many modern medicines have their origins in folk treatments that actually had pharmacological effects. But rabies was different. Mad stones had no pharmacological effects. They were inert objects. Their only power was the power of belief. And that power, while profound in its own way, couldn't stop a virus from destroying a human brain. In recent years, researchers have analyzed mad stones from museum collections, trying to understand exactly what they were. Some, as noted earlier, were genuine bezoars. Chemical analysis has shown that certain types of bezoar stones, when immersed in solutions containing arsenic, can indeed extract the poison from the liquid through a process of adsorption. The porous structure of the stone acts like a filter, trapping certain molecules. This is likely why bezoars developed a reputation as antidotes in the first place. They actually could neutralize some poisons, at least partially. But rabies is not arsenic. Rabies is not a chemical poison that can be filtered out or neutralized. It is a replicating organism, a virus, something that by 1885 existed in numbers beyond counting in every drop of saliva from a rabid animal. No stone, no matter how porous, no matter how powerful the belief in it, could extract a virus that was already traveling up nerve cells toward the brain. The mad stone story is ultimately a story about the gap between what we wish were true and what actually is true. For thousands of years, humanity wished for a cure for rabies. We invented cures, we believed in cures, we passed down stories of miraculous recoveries that proved those cures worked. but wishing doesn't make something true. Belief doesn't alter biology. The virus didn't care about the stone pressed against the wound. It didn't care about the rituals, the prayers, the faith. It just did what viruses do. It infected cells, it replicated, it killed. And yet, here is the strange thing. The people who used mad stones, who believed in them, who built their lives and their medical practices around them, they weren't stupid. They weren't ignorant in the way we sometimes imagine historical people to have been ignorant. They were doing the best they could with the knowledge and tools available to them. They observed that sometimes people who used mad stones didn't develop rabies. They drew what seemed like a reasonable conclusion. They created a theory of how the stones worked that fit with their understanding of medicine and disease, and they acted accordingly. The lesson, perhaps, is not that our ancestors were foolish, but that human knowledge is always incomplete. We operate based on what we think we know. We build practices and beliefs around the evidence we have available, even when that evidence is flawed or partial or misinterpreted. 1,000 years from now, people will look back at 21st century medicine and shake their heads at the things we got wrong, at the treatments we used that turned out to be useless or harmful, at the beliefs we held that evidence eventually disproved. The mad stone is a reminder of that humility we should feel when we look at how much we don't know, how much we're probably getting wrong right now without realizing it. It's a reminder that the history of medicine is not a straight line of progress, but a winding path with many dead ends and wrong turns, with periods where humanity believed absolutely in things that turned out to be completely false. But it's also a reminder of hope, because the rabies story doesn't end with the mad stones. It ends with a vaccine. It ends with Louis Pasteur looking at an impossible disease and refusing to accept that impossibility. It ends with thousands of researchers over the decades working to improve that vaccine, to make it safer, to make it more accessible. It ends with a world where rabies is entirely preventable, where no one has to die from this disease if they can reach medical care in time. We went from stones to salvation, from desperate rituals to genuine cures. And that transformation, that movement from superstition to science, from faith to understanding, is one of the great triumphs of human civilization. Not because the people who used mad stones were wrong to try, but because eventually we learned enough to do better. The story continues. In remote parts of the world, rabies still kills. 59,000 people a year, most of them children under the age of 15. Most of them in Asia and Africa. Most of them in rural areas where dogs roam free and bite, where post-exposure prophylaxis costs more than a family makes in months, where the nearest hospital with vaccine in stock might be a day's travel away. For these people, rabies is still the death sentence it was in 1885, in 1785, in 500 BCE. For these people, the distance between infection and treatment is an impossible gulf. Organizations like the World Health Organization and the Global Alliance for Rabies Control are working to change this. Mass dog vaccination campaigns in rabies endemic areas. Education programs teaching people to seek immediate medical care after animal bites. Efforts to make post-exposure prophylaxis more affordable and more widely available. The goal is to eliminate dog-mediated human rabies deaths by 2030, an ambitious target that would save hundreds of thousands of lives. But progress is slow, funding is limited, political will varies by region, and in the meantime, people keep dying. The virus keeps spreading. The madness keeps taking victims, keeps creating new tragedies that echo all the old tragedies that came before. When you sit with that reality, when you truly contemplate the fact that we have the ability to prevent every single rabies death but haven't yet marshaled the resources to do so, it forces a reckoning with what we value as a global society. We went to the moon. We built the internet. We decoded the human genome. But we can't get vaccines to every child who needs them. We can't stop a disease that we completely understand, that we have the tools to prevent, from killing tens of thousands of people every year. The mad stones of the 18th and 19th centuries couldn't save anyone, but at least the people who used them were trying. At least they were doing everything within their limited power to protect their families and their communities. What's our excuse? As the night deepens, as we move toward the end of this story, it's worth reflecting on what the mad stones represented beyond their supposed medical properties. They were objects of continuity, passed down through generations, connecting families across time. They were sources of community identity. A town or region known for having an effective mad stone gained a certain prestige, became a destination for desperate people seeking hope. The owners of mad stones took on a role that was part healer, part priest, part keeper of ancient knowledge. When Reverend Sutton treated Adam rarely in 1923, when he brought out the stone that had been in his family since just after the Civil War, he was enacting a ritual that connected him to his ancestors, that gave him a place in the great chain of healers stretching back into antiquity. There was dignity in that. There was meaning in it. Even if the stone didn't actually cure rabies, the ritual of its use served social and psychological functions that were valuable in their own right. We've lost something, perhaps, in the transition to modern medicine. Lost the sense of continuity and tradition. Lost the personal relationships between healer and patient that came from seeking out the keeper of a mad stone in your community. Modern medicine is clinical, standardized, evidence-based. It's far more effective, but it's also more impersonal. You go to a hospital, you see a doctor you may never have met before, you receive a treatment that's been tested in randomized controlled trials, and you go home. There's no ritual, no sense of participating in a tradition that stretches back through the centuries, no personal connection to the person administering the cure. This isn't an argument for returning to mad stones, obviously. The effectiveness of treatment matters more than the aesthetics of how it's delivered. But it's worth acknowledging what we lost in the transition, and perhaps worth thinking about how we might recapture some of it. How we might make modern medicine more human, more connected to tradition and community, without sacrificing the efficacy that makes it actually work. The story of mad stones is ultimately a story about fear and hope, about the lengths people will go to protect what they love, about the power of belief to comfort even when it can't cure. It's a story about the slow, difficult, halting progress of human knowledge, about how hard it is to let go of what we think we know, even in the face of evidence that we're wrong. And it's a story about one of humanity's oldest enemies, a virus that has killed us for as long as we've lived alongside the animals we domesticated, that made our closest friends, our dogs, into vectors of death. For most of human history, that enemy was invincible. Now it's not. Now we have the tools to defeat it completely. The question is whether we'll use those tools, whether we'll do what's necessary to protect everyone, everywhere, from a disease that no longer has any reason to exist. The mad stones sit in museums. The beliefs that surrounded them have faded into history. But the fear they were meant to address, the terror of rabies, that's still with us, still real for millions of people, still waiting to be finally, completely, definitively ended. Before we close, consider this. The story of mad stones is a parable about the entire human experience. We face problems that seem impossible to solve. We don't have the knowledge or tools we need, so we make do. We improvise. We create explanations that make sense given what we know. We develop rituals and traditions that give structure to our fears. We do everything we can, knowing that it might not be enough, hoping that it will be. And sometimes, after generations of doing the best we can with what we have, someone comes along with a genuine solution. Someone who looks at the problem from a new angle, who brings new knowledge, who refuses to accept that what has always been must always be. Someone like Louis Pasteur. And suddenly the impossible becomes possible. The incurable becomes curable. The death sentence becomes preventable. But that transition takes time. The old beliefs don't disappear immediately. The new knowledge has to spread, has to be tested, has to prove itself over and over until finally it becomes the new standard. And during that transition period, during those years or decades when both the old and the new exist side by side, people have to make choices. Do they trust the traditional remedy that their grandparents swore by? Or do they take a chance on the new treatment from the scientists in the city? Some choose one, some choose the other, and their choices have consequences. The people who chose mad stones over Pasteur's vaccine in the 1890s and early 1900s were making a mistake, but it was an understandable mistake. They were choosing what they knew, what they trusted, what had the weight of generations behind it. They were choosing wrong, but they didn't know that. They couldn't see the virus under a microscope. They couldn't read the scientific papers proving the vaccine's efficacy. All they had was belief and tradition, and for some of them, that belief killed them. We face similar choices today. Climate change, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, all present challenges that require us to choose between the familiar and the unknown, between what we've always done and what the experts say we should do. Some of those choices will turn out to be right. Some will turn out to be wrong. We won't know which is which until we're looking back from the future. The lesson of the mad stones, then, is to hold our beliefs lightly, to be willing to change our minds when new evidence emerges, to respect the wisdom of the past while acknowledging its limitations, to honor the people who came before us even as we move beyond the solutions they created, to remember that today's cutting-edge science is tomorrow's historical curiosity, and to approach both with humility. The mad stones couldn't cure rabies, but the people who believed in them were trying to solve an impossible problem with the tools they had available. They were trying to protect their children, their communities, themselves. They were trying to push back against death, to find some measure of control in a world that seemed chaotic and cruel. That impulse, that drive to protect and heal and hope, that's never been superstition. That's always been the most human thing about us. And when Louis Pasteur developed his vaccine, when he finally gave humanity a real weapon against rabies, he was acting on that same impulse. He was trying to save lives. He was trying to end suffering. He was trying to turn hope into reality. The tools were different. The understanding was deeper. But the motivation was the same. From ancient Mesopotamia to modern laboratories, from bezoar stones in royal courts to mad stones on the American frontier to vaccines in hospital clinics, the story has always been the same. Humanity struggling against disease, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, always trying, always hoping, always learning. Always moving, slowly, haltingly, but moving nonetheless toward a future where fewer people have to suffer, where fewer children have to die, where the ancient terrors that haunted our ancestors become footnotes in history books. The mad stones are gone. The belief in them has faded. But the spirit that created them, the determination to fight even when the odds seem impossible, that remains, that endures. That carries us forward into whatever challenges come next, whatever new diseases or problems or fears we'll have to face. We'll face them the way we always have, with courage, with innovation, with hope, with an absolute refusal to accept that what is must always be. The rabies virus is still out there, still waiting in the saliva of infected animals, still capable of causing the same horror it caused 4,000 years ago. But now we understand it. Now we can prevent it. Now we can save the children who would have died in agony in any previous century. That's progress. That's victory. That's worth celebrating even as we acknowledge how far we still have to go. The gentle conclusion arrives as dawn approaches somewhere in the world. The story of mad stones and rabies, of folk remedies and scientific breakthroughs, of fear and hope, and the long arc of human progress. This story is never really over. It continues in laboratories where researchers work on even better vaccines, even more effective treatments. It continues in rural villages where healthcare workers administer post-exposure prophylaxis to children bitten by stray dogs. It continues in the museums where mad stones sit behind glass, silent witnesses to the beliefs of our ancestors, reminders of how far we've come and how much we've learned. There is comfort in knowing that the terror our ancestors felt, the helplessness they experienced when facing rabies, is no longer necessary. That parents today don't have to watch their children die from a dog bite. That the virus, while still dangerous, while still requiring immediate medical attention, is no longer a death sentence. That's a gift purchased with centuries of suffering and observation and experimentation and failure and persistence. The mad stones don't work. They never worked. But the people who believed in them, who used them, who passed them down through generations, they deserve our respect. They were doing their best. They were trying to survive in a world much harder and more dangerous than ours. They created meaning and ritual and hope in the face of meaningless death. And eventually, their descendants created something better. Created real cures. Created a world where the old fears could finally be laid to rest. Sleep now, if sleep is what you're seeking. Dream of a world where all diseases are as preventable as rabies has become, where the folk remedies of today are replaced by the scientific miracles of tomorrow, where suffering continues to decrease, knowledge continues to increase, and humanity continues its slow but steady march toward a future less afraid, more capable, more kind. The story continues. It always continues. But for tonight, for now, we can rest. The mad stones have taught us their lessons. The rabies virus, ancient enemy of humanity, has been understood and defeated. And somewhere in a laboratory or a clinic or a village, someone is working to make tomorrow even better than today. The story continues. But you can rest now. You can close your eyes. The terrors that haunted the night for thousands of years, they're receding now, fading into history, becoming stories we tell about where we've been and how far we've come. Rest now. Dream well. The mad stones are behind glass now, their power gone, their secrets revealed. And that, in the end, is how all our nightmares should be. Understood, defeated, reduced to stories that help us sleep.